take over the show, and then we'll have some time for, they'll each give a brief, some brief comments, and then we'll have some time for discussion and Q&A. This panel consists of Professor Tom Yulsman, who is the director of the Center for Environmental Journalism here in the College of Media and Communication and Information here at CU. Tom is also a professor of journalism, and I should also say is a practicing journalist as well. And so he interestingly and I think significantly bridges that professional divide that I was alluding to earlier this morning between professional journalists and academics. So it's great to have Tom here as part of the symposium, and it's great to have the support of his center as well. And we also have Isabel Hilton, who flew in late last night from London. And so we ordered up some British weather, although she assures me that it's much nicer in London now than it is here. So we're always trying to one-up the English on the weather department. But Isabel is, and I'll digress for a minute, again, just because of my own position as a geographer of China and who teaches Chinese geography. Isabel's the director of China Dialogue, which is a very innovative and unique website that publishes news and information about China's environment, both in English and in Chinese. It's a fully bilingual website, and is one of the most, if not the most important resources online for up-to-date information about environmental issues and environmental conditions in China. And it's an incredible service to those of us who teach about these issues and do research about these issues on a regular basis in China. So we are very much indebted to Isabel and the work that she has been doing with that site. And I know it's not just her, she's got an amazing team of people that she works with on that as well. But it's great to have her here as well to share her insights with us as well. So with that, I will just turn it over to Tom's going to speak first, and then we'll hear from Isabel, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim, for that introduction. I'm going to talk today about environmental issues in Asia. And it's really a bit of a case study focusing on China, but as we'll see, it's just a case study to make a bigger point. And of course, speaking about air quality, without fail, when I stood up to the podium, I started to get a little touch of asthma. So if I cough, you'll forgive me. And I think it was actually from having grown up in New York City in the 1960s and 1970s, when the skies of New York looked a bit like the skies of Beijing, or maybe perhaps not as bad. So the title is What Goes Around, and you all know the expression, I think, what goes around comes around. So that's really the punchline. I want to start by saying this is not a talk about, ooh, look at how bad air pollution problems are in China and environmental issues, how, you know, the challenges that they're facing there. The punchline, which I'll get into in more detail at the end, is basically that we're all in this together, that the air quality issues that we see in China are a direct consequence of, and I left my prop, my iPhone, and the various gizmos and gadgets that we use all around the world, but certainly here in the West, and we have outsourced that production to places like China. So that's where I'm headed. But what I thought I would do is sort of set the stage for Isabel to just give a sense of the environmental issues that are confronting Asia, and focusing in particular on air pollution, and doing it in a way that I do as a journalist. Among other things, I have a blog at Discover magazine called Imagio, which is a combination of image and geo and imagination, all those things. And I try to communicate these issues to a somewhat technically oriented audience. I mean, they're lay readers, but they're very interested in science. I try to do it through visuals, so I thought I would try to do that in this talk. So this image I took in Beijing in 2013. The beautiful sunset, those warm orange and red colors, are a little bit oversaturated in this image. Nevertheless, it's very pretty. But it's a result of fine particulate pollution. I'll just say that I was in China because my daughter, of all things, spent her freshman year in Shanghai, learning, among other things, Chinese. So the whole family, of course, had to go over to see her, and we spent time in Asia. And I'm happy to report that she's an environmental studies student who's fluent in Chinese. So I think we have somebody who has a good job course in front of her. All right, so that's a sort of pretty picture of air pollution on a not so bad day. Here's a not so pretty picture of air pollution in China, in Beijing, on a pretty bad air pollution day. And you know, it's a broad avenue, broad boulevard, modern city, big buildings, and you can see part of the problem, but it's only part of the problem, is the traffic that we see here. But that's only part of the problem. So in keeping with what I like to do at my blog, I use remote sensing imagery a lot. And so what I thought I would do is show you some before and after images of Beijing. And Beijing is this gray area right there, and you can see the mountains in the backdrop. That's where the Great Wall is. Before and after images using, from satellites to depict the problem. And what you're going to see is a sequence of 3 images. One is good, the next one is bad, and then the third one is worst. And so let's take a look at what that looks like. That's bad, and that's worst. So the not bad, worst. You can see just how obscured that entire region actually of China becomes. And what you're looking at is not clouds. You're looking at mostly, and in some parts of the image down in this portion when the animation runs are clouds, and up here, but all of this stuff here, that pea soup, is air pollution. I thought I'd show you another view, this one after a snowstorm. The reason I decided to do it again is that oftentimes these air quality problems in Beijing, it's mostly a problem or the worst of the problem is in the wintertime. And so this is winter. I believe this is actually 2013. And once again, you see what happens, and it's pretty thick, pretty nasty. So just to sort of make the point that this isn't a problem just for Beijing, it's a problem elsewhere in Asia. This is Delhi right here. This is the Himalayan mountain front, and you'll see something that looks very similar. So before and after, that's the before image. Satellite image was actually from March, this past March. And this one, I believe, was from November. The pollution image was from November 28th. And also to make that point that it's not just a Chinese problem or an Indian problem. This is an image from NASA's Terra Satellite. We can see these smoke plumes. Those are not clouds. These are smoke plumes, and the little red dots are places where the satellite detected fire, and those are burning agricultural fields, creating these thick plumes of smoke that drifted over to Singapore, caused very significant air quality issues. I think it was not too much to say it was an air quality emergency in Singapore, and this is also, I believe, 2013. This is interesting. I mentioned those fires are from for clearing agricultural fields. What you're going to look at here is an animation of Landsat images. It's something that is called Google Earth Engine. Basically, they animate satellite images over from 1984 to 2012, pretty much everywhere in the world. And what we're looking at is just a small piece of Sarawak. It's going to, in Malaysia, it's going to start in 1984 and work through to 2012. And in this image, you can see, which is 2012 in this screenshot, you can see these fields. So you watch the development of deforestation in Sarawak as soon as this loads up. And we're going to slow this down. So 1984 moving forward in time, and you can see in this portion those fields which were forest in 1984 being converted to palm oil plantations. I think you get the idea. Now, oftentimes, this is a really gross exaggeration of the kind of theme that we often see. It's those Indonesians, those Malaysians, they are, how dirty palm oil reaches the global market, how deforestation for palm oil is driving Sumatran tigers toward extinction. Granted, this is not a journalistic product. This is from an activist organization, Greenpeace, licensed to kill the tigers. But that's often how we hear about this problem, right? It's this horrible things that Indonesia and Malaysia is doing to the rainforest. And they're killing off the tigers, they're killing off the species. But again, the punchline of our talk is that we're all in this together. Why are they creating palm oil plantations? Well, first of all, they're economically, they provide some economic benefits, obviously, to the country. They provide jobs. Palm oil the trees that produce palm oil last for something like 30 years. So there's this, there's this opportunity to provide economic well-being for people for a long period of time. And palm oil goes into a huge variety of products and foods that we eat. So, if there's demand, somebody's going to meet the demand. So we're part of this. And my message is not to go, ooh, you guys, you shouldn't be cutting down your rainforest. My message is that we're all in this together and we have to figure out how to live more sustainably. So just to make that point that it's not just a problem in China, but moving back to China, this is a headline from The Guardian. Inside Beijing's airpocalypse, a city made almost uninhabitable by pollution. The 21 million inhabitants of China's capital appear to be engaged in a citywide rehearsal for life on an inhospitable planet. Only it's not a rehearsal. The poisonous atmosphere is already here. Pretty dramatic headline writing. You really have to read that story. Just before I sort of prepared this talk, I just wanted to check, how are things right now? It's wintertime in Beijing, the worst time for air pollution, and it's pretty bad, or at least it was. This is from Tuesday. There was a sandstorm that came in from Mongolia and mixed with the industrial pollution and caused a really big problem. And when I say really big, I mean really big. We're looking at the air quality index for, well, you can see the map here for a big area of northern China and Beijing. And then this is just calling out the air quality index for a city south of Beijing. I don't speak Chinese, so my apologies if I pronounce it wrong. Dezhu. 999 is like, anybody have a Prius here? Right? So when you're coasting, it's getting 99 miles to the gallon. Actually, that just means that it's off the charts. Here, it's off the charts. There is no number to actually explain what is going on. And just to reinforce that point, here is the air quality index. It goes from 0 to 500. 500 is considered hazardous. It's a health alert. That day in that part of China, we were, we were probably well more than twice as bad as hazardous. That's really nasty. We'll skip that one in the interest of time. Why in the winter? Real simply, it's air inversions that occur in wintertime. You generally get calm winds, and an inversion can result in poor air quality. The sun is pretty low in the sky. It's providing less warmth. There's less mixing of the atmosphere because of that. An inversion occurs when warm air up high kind of traps cold air near the ground. That could be made worse if you've got mountains that back up against your city. That's the case in Beijing. And we'll also, well, no, I'll just make the point. This is traveling from Shanghai to Beijing. And you see these pop-up skyscrapers. These new cities are growing every which way you look. So why do we care? What's the problem? The problem, and the biggest problem, is fine particulate pollution. They call it PM 2.5. There are particles that are 2.5 microns or smaller. For scale, you can see this is beach sand. This is a human hair. These blue particles are dust, pollen, and mold. And then superimposed on the dust particles are 2.5 micron and smaller pollution particles. And so they're very tiny. You can breathe them in very deeply into your lungs, where they cause a lot of problems. They can exacerbate and cause heart disease. They cause all sorts of health problems. This is a story I wrote for my blog in Discover when a new study came out saying that globally air pollution kills more than 2 million people every year. In fact, there were varying estimates for this, and some estimates are higher. The recent updated World Health Organization estimate is that the burden of disease from outdoor air pollution caused 3.7 million premature deaths worldwide in cities and rural areas in 2012. That's a greater death toll than from tuberculosis, malaria, and HIV/AIDS combined. That one was a real eye-opener to me. That's huge. How do they arrive at these figures? How accurate are they? Hard to say, but at least it gives you a sense of the magnitude of the problem, if not more. There are also health impact costs, $1.4 trillion estimated for China, $0.5 trillion in India. Again, I think we have to maybe take these numbers with a little bit of grain of salt, but nevertheless gives us a sense of the scope of the problem. I'm going to skip this one. And just to show you a map of premature deaths around the world from both ozone, air pollution, and also PM 2.5. One thing I don't quite understand are the negative numbers, but we'll put that aside for a minute. The important part is for both ozone on the top here and for PM 2.5 on the bottom, we can see that quite a few of these premature deaths are concentrated in India and in China. Not to say that other parts of the world don't have a problem, but that's pretty striking to see that. I don't want to gloss over the fact that PM 2.5 is not just a problem in Asia. This is a photograph I took overlooking the Valmont Power Station here in Boulder on a particularly polluted day. PM 2.5 was a problem on that day. That scrim of gray stuff looks kind of familiar, doesn't it? So it's not something that just happens somewhere else. It happens to us. But the point is that it has been mostly getting better here in the United States, and I wanted to show you this animation that I used for my blog. This is showing decreases in nitrogen dioxide pollution averaged yearly from 2005 to 2011. And the red is indicative of high, and then you can see 2005, and then 2011 it shrinks. That's pretty good. That's really good. We've made progress. If you actually look at this animation carefully, you might actually be able to pick up some signs that perhaps the trend might be turning in a few areas, maybe because of the upsurge of drilling for oil and gas, but that's to be determined. And so what I want to do is bring this full circle so that we get to the what goes around, comes around part of the talk, and then finish and turn it over to Isabel. This is a story that actually one of my grad students did for Discover about how 1/5 of China's air pollution from exporting, for the pollution that's created because of producing products for export, actually drifts back to us across the Pacific Ocean, making that point that we're all in this together. China is the world's largest producer of air pollutants now. How much is associated with production of goods for export? It turns out that in 2006, according to a recent study, 36% of human-caused sulfur dioxide was from the production of goods for export, 27% for nitrogen oxide, 22% for carbon monoxide, 17% of black carbon, and for our share of it, the U.S. export, China to U.S. export portion of it, 20% roughly of these numbers is because of our consumption of products that are made in China. And so to really just tie the threads together, transport of export-related Chinese pollution contributed 3 to 10% of annual surface sulfate concentrations over the western United States in 2006, drifting across the Pacific. 0.5 to 1.5% of ozone pollution, not much, but nevertheless, it does make that point that we're connected. That amounted to 1 extra day or more of noncompliance with the U.S. ozone standard in 2006 over the Los Angeles area. On a daily basis, export-related Chinese pollution contributed 12 to 24% of sulfate pollution over the western United States, and that's pretty significant. That's no small thing. So to conclude, the point really here is that as the U.S. has outsourced manufacturing to China, sulfate pollution in 2006 increased in the western United States, even as it was decreasing in the eastern United States. So our air quality regulations have worked to reduce it, but we're on the western part of the United States, we're getting it, some of our consumption blowing back to haunt us. So the bottom line, we've outsourced our emissions to places like China. Some is coming back to us. To make that point that we're all in this together. And with that, I'm going to switch computers and turn it over to Isabel.
So I want to pick up from a lot of things that have been said, which actually fit in extremely well with what I want to say. You're going to have to stop me talking at some point because this is a very big subject, and what I want to do is to try and draw together some of the threads that have been laid out, and to look at very briefly at China's pollution crisis. I think we get the picture that China is very polluted, but this the rise of China's pollution, if you like, has also coincided with the rise of the digital age in China. And so the question of how do you fix a pollution crisis and control information and control what people think and say. So you have a party that is still a Lenin's party, but is having to be more concerned with public opinion, and is also actually trying to get the policy right and get the policy implemented at the same time as it's trying to execute a major economic shift from low added value, heavily polluting, all that stuff, first phase, classic first wave of Asian tiger growth, into higher value, more innovative, more efficient kind of economy. So you have an awful lot of things going on at once. And anyway, so that's why I might go on too much, but if I do, I apologize. So the other health warning, I'm sure, and many of you I know are China experts, but my favorite quote about China, and it's the only one that has never gone out of date and becomes more true, actually, as time goes by. And it comes in that famous journalistic category of too good to check. It's attributed to General de Gaulle. And when asked about China, he said, China's a very big country and a lot of people live there. And I love it because it's my absolute favorite banality. And it's also the source of we all know this, of course, but actually it's the reason why China is such a big concern, because it is a very big place. It makes policy difficult, it makes development difficult, and everything that China does has a weight in the world that, as Thomas just said, China's pollution is our pollution. China's production is our consumption. China's policy decisions impact us and third countries. So that is every time we think about why doesn't China do this or that, you think of how you try to govern the world's 1/5 of the world's population. And it's pretty tough. And sometimes people don't find. This is China Dialogue, by the way. I just wanted to, for those of you who don't know it, you can read it in English and Chinese. It's been going since 2006. And it's an exercise in publishing in both directions. So we try to publish out of China, as it were, unmediated Chinese voices, so policymakers, journalists, civil society people, so that if you don't read Chinese, you might want to get direct access to how they see it and how it looks. And we publish into China material about environment and climate change that we hope will be useful to our Chinese readers, mostly about elsewhere. So to avoid the question of, here am I, a foreigner, telling you about your own country, we try very hard to use Chinese writers writing on China, but we also think that there are lessons to be learned, and particularly since China seems determined to make every mistake that we made, we might speed along the solutions a bit if we can get those things into China, translated and made available to our readership. And so we've very quickly built up a kind of fairly even-handed readership, about 49% in China, the rest in the rest of the world, 180 countries around the world, but predominantly the English-speaking ones. We never did very well in Russia, curiously enough. But so there was a sense of an exchange there is a sense of an exchange. And as it's gone on, we've expanded to, we set up a website dealing with transboundary water in the Himalayan watershed, again, trying to get over a cultural and language barrier, because the waters, all the great rivers of Asia begin in the Qinghai Tibet Plateau and then flow across 9 countries, most of whom dislike each other and have fought wars recently, and all blame each other for their water problems instead of managing their own water. So we're trying to get a non-nationalistic, non-antagonistic conversation about water going. And we've just opened up in Latin America, looking at China's environmental impact on Latin America. So that's what we do. We're a not-for-profit. We have offices in Beijing, Delhi, Sao Paulo, and London. And so our experience of environmental journalism, of looking at China's environmental problem, of trying to understand it from multiple points of view, rather than the, why should I change my light bulb if you're building a coal-fired power station every 10 minutes, rather dead-end conversation. So we're trying to get beyond that into the kind of, we're all in this together, so how do we solve it together without sounding too much like apple pie. So China's at this pivotal moment in many ways, and a combination of all these things coming into play. China, when I first went there, looked like that. So where did the environmental crisis come from? It comes from going from that to that. In the course of 20 or 30 years, we've all done it. Speaking as a Brit, I think we invented this toxic model of how you develop industry. And it was one of our greatest exports. Everybody did it after we did. So, and then China did it. So the problem with China doing it is that, the headroom is lower. You're starting off from a much worse situation. Very big population, very scarce on natural resources. So the crisis comes faster. In fact, the development comes faster, but the crisis comes faster too. And now we're having to deal with all the things I mentioned in the beginning and deal with the legacy of pollution, which is going to be very expensive and very difficult, and people are getting very, very fed up. So the legacy of past choices includes what kind of cities you build. Now, when Chinese and indeed many of us imagine the modern, imagine the contemporary, we think of the American model. So as a result of a series of perverse decisions that were made in the United States in the 30s and 40s to do with the shape of the cities, which were in the service of the car industry and the oil industry, you got sprawl. They got sprawl. They got sprawl because the city that they imagined was not Copenhagen, it was Los Angeles, when they thought of how do we modernize China, and made almost exactly that. There are other reasons for it to do with financing development and land use, but essentially China's now locked into cities that look like that. Now, contemplating a 10th ring road in Beijing, which will be about 100 miles from the center. And, the same thing that happened in Los Angeles has happened in Beijing. The other big crisis, and the reason that this has forced itself onto the national agenda, is China's water. China's water, I cannot overstate the seriousness of China's water crisis. Again, they start off with a low per capita allocation. It's badly managed. It's polluted. Urbanization, industrialization, and agriculture are making more and more demands. These demands are not really being met naturally. And so from available surface water, so the budget is being compensated for by groundwater extraction, particularly in North China. North China is very dry. South China tends to have too much water on occasion. So you have a combination of over-extraction, both from surface water from the rivers and from the groundwater. And this is like heading into personal bankruptcy. We're heading into water bankruptcy in North China in very short order, around 2030 on business as usual. Now this, show me how this means that environment is not a fringe preoccupation in China. Show me how you run an economy or a society if you've run out of water. In addition, we have big health impacts, and the slightly underrepresented crisis, which is this one. I'm going to talk a bit about open information later, but one of the areas which have not been terribly open was soil pollution, partly as a result of water pollution, irrigating with contaminated water, also kind of fallout from coal-fired power stations and chemical plants and so on, has resulted in a most intractable form of pollution. Air and water pollution, they're difficult, but you can do it. Soil pollution is a real problem because it's essentially, if you look at the soil remediation projects kind of here or in Europe, they tend to just take the soil away and start again. But in China, it's too big. There's too little soil. And so having realized the extent of the problem, they basically sat on it, wondering what to do, and declared it a state secret 2 years ago. So it's hard to get a complete picture, but it is emerging in things like contaminated rice, heavy metals in food, which cause, great distress and obviously health problems and things like that. So that's another one. The key trends thing is just that, China will urbanize another 300 million people, and how they do it, how they make these decisions, is going to be one of the big things that determines whether this crisis gets worse or begins to turn around. Now, someone said earlier on that she detected signs of appreciation of this problem in China. There certainly are signs of appreciation because it's absolutely central to prosperity. This is threatening legitimacy of government, because if you have all the power, you have all the blame. It's threatening health, it's threatening future generations, it's threatening pretty much everything. And so, yes, it's taken seriously at a very high level. I'm sure the 12th five-year plan is by everybody's bedside, because favorite reading. But if it is a kind of statement of, it's a statement of sustainability. It's trying to move this economy into a more sustainable model. It's just very hard to do. I'm being signaled to. Just to make the point that we did it, and that there were these pivotal moments. There were this pivotal moment that everyone who went through this arc, there comes a point where the price is too high. And there are things that awaken that feeling. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring's been mentioned. I'm sure you remember this one. Several times, actually, that river caught fire. Pretty shocking. In Japan, it was Minimoto. In London, it was the Great Smog of 1961, which was actually far worse than on a deaths per head of population basis than what's going on in Beijing now. So there are these moments. The problem is that all those moments happened in more responsive political systems than we have in China. And if you look at what happened to make, what are the instruments that you reach for when you're trying to turn an economy around, when you have a lot of vested interest to contend with, as happens everywhere, when you're trying to find a new model where people say, yeah, but what about the jobs? What about the costs? All the things that people say. There are a number of instruments in, let's call them more responsive political systems, more participatory political systems, that help you if you're the government at that point. They help you make good policy, they help you get that policy implemented, and they are active civil society, thinking of the powerful American NGOs that bring cases to the courts. And they do tremendous public education, and they actually get laws passed and implemented. You need courts that function. A free press is no bad thing if you're trying to expose wrongdoing, transgression, educate the public. And as I say, civil society, activists, none of those exist in China. So you've got a top-down system in which you have a high degree of consciousness of the problem and a desire to solve it, and a whole planning system that beavers away on 5-year plans, trying to figure out, how you implement all this. But you have none of the horizontal controls. And that's a problem, because what you get then is you get gaming of the system, you get cheating. It's not all fun being in the Communist Party, just to make that point. So at the same time as you're grappling with all this, the no doubt unwelcome and development of the internet happens. So instead of being able to keep it all nicely under control while you get it fixed, you suddenly have an explosion of this new technology. I just wanted to put this in because the irony of the first email that was ever sent from China, which was sent to Karlsruhe, is the bit in red. And it's kind of ironic, given what we've been talking about earlier in the day, that that was the feeling about the internet when it first started. And of course, it developed very quickly, and it being China, the numbers are staggering. So suddenly, instead of having a Leninist model of we control the information and we guide public opinion, we tell people what to think, we kill off other messages. This is what the party state does. You've suddenly got everybody thinking that they have a right to information and that they have a right to express opinions and so on. And you have a tremendous problem about guiding public opinion at this point. And you have an increasingly feisty middle class. You have you're transforming your economy so there are winners and the losers are often on the streets. You're trying to deal with all this, and you've somehow lost control of the story. You've lost control of the narrative. And that's problematic. So anyway, I think I'm going to have to skip through this quite quickly, just to give you a sense of what Xi Jinping is trying to do. He's a very, very tough leader. He's making no concessions. And this is really what we've seen. This is an image of this is a cartoonist who publishes on Weibo. And that's his view of the Chinese internet at present. I was going to sort of trot you through a few of the tropes on the Chinese internet, but maybe I'll skip. Do you read the Chinese internet? Do you know about things like the grass mud horse and that kind of thing? Is everybody nodding? Does anyone not know? No, I can see. Okay, I'll do it very quickly. The Chinese internet is a garden of delights. It is absolutely, we all know God gave us the internet basically for, gambling and shopping and pornography and pictures of kittens, but there are these perverse minorities who insist on, trading information and ideas. And in the Chinese internet, often very, very wittily. So there's this game going on between the censor and the netizen, which is acted out in very culturally interesting terms. If you don't know Chinese, a characteristic of the language is that it doesn't have a lot of sounds, but it is visually very rich. So you have a lot of homonyms, so it's easy to make puns, and you can do it through the fact that characters that sound the same mean different things. This can have some quite startling results. This is all about how you. So here's a chap you need to meet. This is the grass mud horse. Okay, so what is the grass mud horse? Well, now I hope you're not too sensitive here because it's quite rude, but a few years ago there appeared a bestiary in the Chinese internet in which there were lots of animals with names which were plausible but actually quite rude. So the grass mud horse is an alpaca, right? And it's a plausible name, except that if you just alter it a little bit. Oh, sorry, let me. I haven't. Where have I? It's gone. It's gone. No, have I gone past the? I had some characters there. Yeah. Okay. So here we have the horse. Now the horse sounds the same as mother, right? So grass. How would I explain that one? Well, ni mud. So mud horse. Ni can also mean your. So if I give you that, you can probably guess what Sao can also mean. It means doing something very unusual to your mother, right? So all you had, and being a very silly animal, as soon as the alpaca appears, you're basically saying screw you to the party, and you don't actually have to say anything. This is another quite funny one. These guys photoshopped themselves inspecting a road. But it was so obviously a Photoshop that people started producing pictures of floating officials in almost any situation. This is the grandma. He's always there laughing. This is another lovely one. This young man ran over a couple of students, and when he was hauled out of the car, he said, "You can't touch me. My father's Li Gang." Li Gang was the local police official. So he then became a folk hero. This is the kind of socialist hero, and the slogan there says, "My father is Li Gang." And this is a lovely road sign which says, "Slow down, friend, your father's not Li Gang." So all these things, just to give you a flavor that, the censors don't have it easy in China, right? So because people are always playing, oh yeah, and this is a composite too. This is a 5 Mao note, a 50-cent note, and with a grass mud horse, 2 grass mud horses. 50 cents is significant because of the 50-cent party. The 50-cent party are people who are paid to blog the government point of view, so that you have censorship on the one hand, and you have the government trying to persuade on the other, because censorship doesn't persuade. So you have people popping up all over the web saying, you know, we love Xi Jinping and isn't the government wonderful? And they're known as the 50 cent army or party. So just to give you a sense. So the party then gets into microblogging because it has to get in there with the netizens to try and persuade. But, you know, people are still fighting back because somehow there's no, there's no purchase on the policy. And at the same time, you have an urban middle class, which is getting very fed up with pollution, which is taking to the streets to protest against the siting of chemical plants in their districts and so on. And so you have an explosion of resistance in the real world. This is another cartoon from the web. This is the crowd of people boarding a plane, and it says down here, actually, I'm not going anywhere. I just want to see blue sky. So, you know, people really... this is the obstacles that you have to effecting a change in the environmental crisis. Because it's a top-down system, people just don't obey the law, and the law isn't implemented. There's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of kind of symbolic representation of action. So you'll declare that you're going to build an eco-city, but, you know, it isn't really. So people are it's very, very difficult, I think, without these horizontal controls, in which information and who gets to tell the story plays a huge part. So I haven't really talked an awful lot about the media, but the access to data, the access to information, and the ability to share it is a key element that is currently missing in the policy. And I think that, you know, it's a dilemma for China. This is not a China bashing. This is a kind of sympathy for all my Chinese friends argument. And I absolutely agree that we are also the drivers of this. It's our stuff. It's our cheap stuff. But it is a pivotal moment. And I think that the decisions that are taken now and the effect they have will have a powerful, powerful effect on China's future. I'm not terribly optimistic right now, but I suppose the best we can hope for is that you need to hang on to it in order to change it. And in the optimistic view of what Xi Jinping is doing, which is not pretty, maybe that's it, or maybe it's not. Maybe that's what China's going to be like. Who knows? I'm going to stop talking because the chairman is getting very cross with me. Sorry.